The Arizona Territory in 1874 was not a place for the weak of heart. It was a land where the sun was a hammer that beat down on the earth until it cracked, and the wind carried the whispers of men who had died for gold, for land, or for nothing at all. Thomas Blackwood lived on the edge of this unforgiving world. His ranch, a modest collection of timber and stone nestled in the shadow of the Dragoon Mountains, was an island of peace in a sea of violence. Thomas was a man of few words, a widower who had buried his wife 3 winters ago and poured every ounce of his remaining love into his 10-year-old daughter, Sarah. Sarah was the light in his dark world, a child with hair like spun gold and a laugh that could make the harsh desert seem gentle. Their life was simple, precarious, yes, but peaceful. They woke with the sun, worked the dry soil, and sat on the porch in the evenings watching the shadows lengthen across the valley. Thomas believed that if he kept his head down, if he treated the land with respect and didn't look for trouble, trouble wouldn't look for him. He was wrong. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of stifling, airless afternoon where even the crickets are too hot to sing. Thomas was repairing a fence line a mile from the house, the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of his hammer echoing in the silence. When he heard the scream, his blood turned to ice. It wasn't the cry of a hawk or the yip of a coyote. It was human. It was Sarah. Thomas dropped his hammer. He didn't think. He reacted with the primal instinct of a father protecting his young. He sprinted toward the house, his boots tearing up the dust, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. As he crested the small hill overlooking his cabin, he saw them, riders, not a trading party, not soldiers. They were moving fast, kicking up a storm of dust, wheeling their horses around the yard with chaotic aggression. Raiders, a splinter group, renegades who answered to no law and no chief. Thomas snatched his Winchester from the saddle of his horse and fired, but the distance was too great. He watched, helpless, as a large warrior leaned down from his painted pony and scooped Sarah up from the porch where she had been playing with her dolls. She kicked and screamed, a tiny figure against the massive bulk of the horse and rider, her yellow dress a bright spot of color against the brown and gray of the raid. Thomas roared, a sound of pure agony, and ran harder, his lungs burning. But they were already turning. With whoops and cries that chilled the marrow of his bones, they kicked their mounts into a gallop and thundered toward the treacherous passes of the mountains. By the time Thomas reached the yard, the dust was already settling. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and terrifying. He fell to his knees in the dirt, clutching the small rag doll Sarah had dropped. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the echo of her terror. He looked at the tracks. They headed deep into the Badlands, deep into the heart of Apache territory. Thomas rode to town like a man possessed. He burst into the sheriff's office, covered in sweat and desperation. Sheriff Miller, a man tired of the heat and tired of the endless violence, looked up from his desk. When Thomas explained what happened, Miller just shook his head slowly. "I can't do it, Tom," the sheriff said, his voice heavy with resignation. "Those tracks lead into the stronghold. That's Cochise's land, or maybe Geronimo's by now. If I take a posse in there, we start a war. The army won't authorize it. It's suicide." Thomas stared at the lawman, realizing with a cold clarity that help was not coming. The institutions of civilization stopped at the edge of the map. "She's 10 years old," Thomas whispered, his voice cracking. "She's all I have." Miller looked down at his paperwork. "I'm sorry, Tom, truly, but she's gone." Thomas walked out of the office. He didn't go to the saloon to drown his sorrow. He didn't go to the church to pray. He went to the general store. He bought ammunition. He bought dried meat. He filled 3 canteens. He was forced to make a radical choice. If the white man's law wouldn't save his daughter, he would have to cross the line. He would have to go where no white man went and lived. He would ride straight into the heart of the enemy's land, not to fight an army, but to make a deal. The border of the Apache territory wasn't marked by fences or signs. It was marked by a feeling. The air felt sharper, The rocks seemed to watch you. As Thomas rode his bay gelding deeper into the canyon lands, he felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on him. He was crossing a forbidden line, entering a world that operated on rules he didn't understand. He rode openly. He didn't try to hide in the washes or sneak through the brush. He wanted to be seen. Hiding was an act of war. Riding openly was an act of madness or a parley. For 2 days he rode through the blistering heat, his lips cracking, his eyes scanning the ridgelines. He saw nothing but hawks and lizards, but he knew they were there. The Apache were masters of the land. They could be standing 10 feet away, and you wouldn't know until the knife was at your throat. On the evening of the 3rd day, they revealed themselves. Thomas had stopped to water his horse at a small trickle of a spring when the click of a rifle hammer echoed behind him. He froze. Slowly, he raised his hands. He turned around. 6 warriors stood in a semicircle. They were painted for war, their faces masks of stone. They didn't speak. They simply pointed their weapons. Then the circle parted, and an older man stepped forward. He didn't carry a rifle. He carried a lance adorned with feathers. His face was a map of deep wrinkles and scars, his eyes black and piercing, holding a wisdom that was both terrifying and ancient. This was the elder, the leader of this band. "You have a death wish, White Eyes," the elder asked. His English was broken but clear. "You ride into our home. You carry guns. Why should I not leave your bones for the buzzards?" The tension was thick enough to choke on. Thomas looked the elder in the eye. He didn't plead. He didn't beg. He spoke truth. "I am looking for thieves," Thomas said, his voice raspy from thirst. "Men who steal children. They took my daughter, a girl, 10 summers old. They rode this way." The warriors muttered among themselves. The elder raised a hand, silencing them. "Many men steal," the elder said coldly. "White men steal land, steal water. Why should we care about one white child?" This was the moment, the impossible choice. Thomas knew he couldn't fight them. He had to offer something. He had to forge a pact. "Because the men who took her are not of my people," Thomas said, taking a gamble. "And they are not of yours. They are renegades, Comancheros, mixing with outcasts. They dishonor this land." Thomas took a step forward, exposing his chest to the rifles. "I know these hills have water that only you know. I know the army is coming next month to map the springs to build a fort. I have the maps in my saddlebag, the army's route, their plans." It was a lie partially. Thomas had old survey maps from his time as a scout years ago, but to the Apache it was leverage. "I will give you the maps. I will show you where they plan to build. I will give you my horse, my gun, and my life if need be." The elder studied him. He looked at the desperation in the father's face. He saw not a conqueror, but a man broken by loss, willing to trade his own soul for his blood. "You offer us paper?" The elder scoffed. "No," Thomas said. "I offer you a chance to protect your own children. If those renegades bring the army down on this canyon because of a kidnapped white girl, your people will bleed too. Help me find her. Help me take her back. And I will make sure the army chases ghosts in the South Valley, far from here." It was a dangerous, unprecedented proposal, an alliance between enemies against a common threat. The elder looked at the horizon, then back at Thomas. He saw the fire in the father's eyes. It was a fire the Apache respected. "If you lie," the elder said softly, "I will peel the skin from your body while you scream." Thomas nodded. "If I lie, I welcome it." The pact was forged, not in ink, but in the dust of the desert and the blood of a promise. The hunting party consisted of Thomas and 4 warriors. The leader of the group was a warrior named Chaitan, a man of immense physical power and terrifying silence. At first, the distance between Thomas and the Apache was vast. They rode separately, ate separately, and watched each other with hands hovering near knives. To them, Thomas was a symbol of the encroachment that was destroying their world. To Thomas, they were the boogeymen of every settler's nightmare. But the desert has a way of stripping away prejudice when survival is at stake. They tracked the renegades for 2 days across terrain that would have killed a normal horse. Thomas watched in awe as Chayton tracked signs that were invisible to the naked eye: a turned stone, a broken twig, a drop of dried moisture on a cactus leaf. The renegades were moving fast, heading for the Mexican border where they could sell the girl. The urgency gnawed at Thomas's gut like a rat. On the second night, they camped in a box canyon. The temperature dropped, freezing the sweat on their bodies. Thomas sat by the small, smokeless fire, shivering. Chayton watched him. Without a word, the warrior tossed a buffalo robe to the white man. Thomas caught it, surprised. He looked up. Chayton didn't smile, but he nodded once. "Cold kills the same," the warrior grunted. It was a small gesture, but it cracked the wall between them. Later that night, as they kept watch, Thomas spoke. "Do you have children, Chayton?" The warrior looked at the stars. "I had a son," he said, his voice void of emotion. "Blue coats came to our winter camp. Now I have a memory." Thomas felt the breath leave his lungs. He realized then that the grief driving him was the same grief that hardened Chayton. They were two fathers, separated by war and blood, but united by loss. "I am sorry," Thomas whispered. Chayton looked at him, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Do not be sorry, White Eyes. Be deadly. Tomorrow we find the men who took your daughter. If you hesitate, you die. If you die, she dies." The next day the terrain turned brutal. Vertical climbs up jagged shale, descents into valleys choked with thorns. Thomas's horse went lame. He had to leave it behind. He expected the Apache to leave him, to ride on without the slow white man. Instead, Chayton stopped. He signaled for Thomas to run alongside. Thomas ran. He ran until his boots filled with blood, until his vision blurred. He refused to stop. He refused to show weakness. He saw the warriors watching him, and in their eyes the look of disdain was replaced by a grudging respect. The white man had the heart of a wolf. By late afternoon they found the sign they needed. A scrap of yellow fabric caught on a mesquite bush. Sarah's dress. Thomas grabbed it, pressing it to his face. It smelled of dust and fear. Chayton touched his shoulder and pointed down into the valley below. There, nestled in the rocks, was the renegade camp. Smoke rose lazily. Voices carried on the wind. And there, tied to a wagon wheel, small and terrified, was Sarah. The sun began to dip behind the peaks, painting the canyon in hues of blood red and bruised purple. It was the perfect light for violence. The plan was simple, brutal, and silent. Chayton and two warriors would circle the rim and take out the sentries with bows. Thomas and the fourth warrior, a young brave named Coda, would creep into the camp from the wash. There were 12 renegades. Odds of 3 to 1, but the renegades were drunk on whiskey and arrogance. The Apache were drunk on purpose. Thomas checked his revolver. 6 bullets. He pulled his bowie knife. He looked at Coda. The young warrior made a sign of courage and slipped into the shadows. Thomas followed. They moved like ghosts. The first sentry died with a gurgle as Chayton's arrow pierced his throat. No sound. The second sentry fell moments later. They were inside the perimeter. Thomas could see Sarah clearly now. She was crying silently, her head bowed. Seeing her alive ignited a rage in Thomas so hot it felt cold. A twig snapped under Thomas's boot. A renegade by the fire spun around. "Who's there?" he shouted. The element of surprise vanished. "Now!" Chayton yelled from the ridge. Chaos erupted. Arrows rained down from the cliffs, striking men around the fire. Thomas didn't hide. He sprinted toward the wagon. A large, bearded man blocked his path, raising a shotgun. Thomas dropped to his knees, sliding in the dirt, and fired upward. The man collapsed. Thomas scrambled up, running to Sarah. "Daddy!" she screamed, her voice breaking the chaotic symphony of battle. Thomas reached her, slashing the ropes with his knife. He grabbed her, pulling her against his chest, shielding her eyes from the carnage. "I've got you, baby. I've got you." But it wasn't over. The renegade leader, the massive warrior who had taken her, charged out of a tent, a machete in his hand. He roared, swinging the blade at Thomas's back. Thomas turned, shielding Sarah, preparing to take the blow, but the blow never landed. Chayton appeared out of the smoke, like a demon. He intercepted the leader, slamming into him with the force of a battering ram. The two men rolled in the dust, knife against machete. It was a blur of violence. Chayton was smaller, but he fought with the precision of a surgeon. A flash of steel, a sickening thud, and the renegade leader lay still. Silence returned to the canyon, heavy and smelling of iron. The renegades were dead or scattered. Thomas stood amidst the bodies, holding his daughter, shaking uncontrollably. Chayton stood up, wiping his blade. He looked at Thomas holding the girl. He looked at the tears streaming down the white man's dusty face. Coda and the others gathered around. They didn't cheer. They didn't loot the bodies. They just watched the reunion. For a moment, there were no sides. No Apache, no white man. Just fathers and children, survival and death. Thomas looked at Chayton. "Thank you," he choked out. Chayton nodded. "The debt is paid, but we do not go separate ways yet. We ride to my camp. The elder waits." The journey back was not a prisoner's march, but it wasn't a victory parade either. Thomas rode with Sarah in front of him on a captured horse, surrounded by the warriors. They didn't take him back to the ranch. They took him deep into the stronghold, to the main Apache encampment. This was the place Thomas had feared his whole life, the lair of the savages. But as they rode in, he didn't see monsters. He saw women grinding corn. He saw children playing games with sticks and hoops. He saw old men telling stories by the fire. He saw a community. He saw Chayton dismount and be greeted by a woman who touched his face with infinite tenderness. He saw the humanity that his own people had denied existed. The elder emerged from his wickiup. He looked at Sarah, then at Thomas. "You kept your word," the elder said. "You fought well, for a white eyes." Thomas lowered Sarah to the ground. She stayed close to his leg, looking around with wide, curious eyes. She wasn't afraid. She saw the other children looking at her. A small Apache girl, about Sarah's age, walked up and offered her a small doll made of corn husks. Sarah hesitated, then took it. The two girls smiled. Thomas felt something shift inside him. A wall he had built around his heart, a wall of fear and prejudice, crumbled. He realized that the war outside wasn't about good and evil. It was about fear. "I offered you my life," Thomas said to the elder. "I offered you maps. What do you want now?" The elder looked at the two girls playing in the dust. "Keep your maps," the elder said. "They are useless. The soldiers will come anyway. The wind told us this long ago." The elder stepped closer, placing a hand on Thomas's shoulder, a touch that bridged a century of hatred. "The pact was for the child. But the gift is for the father." "What gift?" Thomas asked. "Sight," the elder replied. "You came here seeing enemies. You leave seeing men. You came here fearing for one child. Now you understand that all children cry the same tears. That is the gift. Take it back to your world. Plant it like a seed. Maybe it will not grow in our time, but maybe in hers." He pointed to Sarah. Thomas rode out of the stronghold the next morning. When he crossed the invisible line back into his own land, he knew he was a different man. He returned to his ranch, but the silence was no longer terrifying. He rebuilt his fences, but he never locked his door again. In the years that followed, as the Indian Wars raged and blood soaked the Arizona soil, Thomas Blackwood's ranch became a strange anomaly. It was a place where no Apache raided, a place where weary travelers found water, regardless of their skin, a place where stories were told. Thomas never fought again. He raised Sarah to speak the truth, to see the human being behind the war paint or the uniform. The Apache Pact wasn't just about a rescue. It was about a revelation. The true gift the elder gave him wasn't Sarah's life. He had fought for that himself. The true gift was the burden of knowing that we are all the same under the harsh sun. And as Thomas sat on his porch in his old age, watching the sunset over the Dragoon Mountains, he knew that was the only legacy worth leaving. A legacy of a promise kept, a line crossed, and a hatred buried in the desert forever.